Hey, there's a lot of places to get great information about cybersecurity, about your career, but did you know that one of the best places to do it is actually out at sea? I've got someone here on our show who's going to tell you exactly how to do that and more. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your host for today, and I have Ira Winkler with me, again, who is going to talk to us about a number of things in cybersecurity, but also kind of following up on what I thought was an amazingly awesome event earlier this year, which was something called CruiseCon. Ira, welcome to the show again.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I mean, for me as I love me box up here in the shadow box for the Navy career. I thought it was kind of interesting because I really haven't not been out on a cruise before. I figured, well, unless I'm, as a captain, I want to be up there on the bridge, driving things around, go to the engineering plant, look at stuff like that. And in fact, I found that the CruiseCon that we did probably had some of the best lineup of speakers that I have seen at any security conference. And so I want to give you a compliment for that. But I understand that wasn't just a one and done. So let's back up a little bit and let's get inside your head a little bit. And like, for those who have not heard of Ira Winkler before, who are you? And you've been around forever. And what are these great things you're working on?
So basically, like you said, as just very quickly, I started my career at NSA. I did stuff there. I ended up leaving to go to the commercial world. One day somebody said, instead of going to the Pentagon, can you make a few phone calls? And 3 days later, I had control over one of the world's largest investment banks, and that was fun. So anyway, I ended up going in the commercial infosec space at the time. We called it info security, not cyber, which meant robots. And, from there, I started a company. I sold to HP, chief security strategist at HP. Did a bunch of stuff after I left, started another company, sold that one, focused on the human aspects of cybersecurity. Then I left, when I sold that, I ended up going to be a CISO for an MSP. Then I was recruited to be chief security architect at Walmart for a while. Now I'm CISO at an Israeli company called Cybersecurity, and working with a bunch of nation state operators again, almost back to my original career. I wrote 8 books. I've keynoted Black Hat, RSA, a bunch of other stuff. But CruiseCon, to get to your point, was I've attended events my entire career, and there's things I like, things I didn't. Most of the events have become what I refer to as a caste system. You have your CISO events, and CISOs can go there. Even when you go to a large event that's for everybody, like RSA, it's kind of become much of a caste system where the average person doesn't realize what they're missing with other, within the event. Like not within the event itself, but actually you do have the ESAF, Executive Security Action Forum, which is only for CISOs of Fortune 500 companies. You have other events like you have the Evolution Equity President's Dinner, which is not the president of Evolution Equity, but a president of the United States, like Bill Clinton, George Bush, etc. there. And I wanted to get back to the original core of what events were, which is how do we get A-list content, bring it all together, and put it in an environment where everybody's equal. Everybody networks with each other and develops lifelong relationships. And that's the essence of what we created at CruiseCon. I appreciate your comments of the best lineup ever. That was intentional. And,
there was fear also. I mean, this is not a paid show, okay? There's no money being exchanged for this episode.
Yeah. But no, I mean, seriously, I brought together, and the thing is, a lot of people acknowledge the caste system itself, but Admiral Rogers, who was our keynote, an awesome individual. I told him, I can't pay you. This is just something. And I'm putting an event on a ship and blah, blah. He's like, Ira, stop. You had me when you said ship. And so...
Yeah, and I love the coins, by the way. I got my speaker here. It's sitting in my drawer. I kind of mentioned as Admiral of the Fleet, Michael S. Rogers, and I noted to you that there actually was a rank admiral of the fleet, that it was only issued one time in 200 years, 250 years now.
And it will only be issued one time with CruiseCon, I
Yes,
can assure
exactly.
you. So we appreciate Admiral Rogers was, frankly, with his presence, it set the tone for the whole event. So he's welcome anytime, whether he speaks or not. But then I also went to friends, like including Ross, who you work with, and everybody, and you are gonna be there in the future too as a speaker. And then with people like CISOs of Fortune 100 companies like Jarek Beeson, well, Fortune 200-ish companies like Jarek Beeson, Jairo Araya, um, sorry, but anyway, lots of day-listers were speakers, out of their own time because, again, they appreciate the mission of democratizing top-tier content and creating a network environment, which is what the goal was.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because a lot of times what will happen is there are events that are out there. So on one extreme would be something like SANS, and I taught for SANS for almost 10 years. And you go there, you get a drink from a fire hose, you pay a lot of money, then you have one class, you have one instructor, or maybe there's a second one, but you just focus on one area. The alternative, you go to something like an InfoSec World or the like, where you've got all kinds of events going on and different tracks, et cetera. And then you get kind of the ridiculous level of RSA when you've got something like 4,096 simultaneous tracks that you could pick from. There's all this stuff going on, and then you try to work it out, and then reality is a lot of people go to RSA for the parties rather than for the content, and then to go down to the vendor showcase. So as you look at all that, one of the things you find out is that our time is quite valuable. The more responsibility you get, the harder it is to break away for a while. And that's what I have found, is that when I try to go ahead and spend time with busy executives, you're less likely to be able to say, hey, let's do it on a Monday morning from 9 to 11. I'm sure there's nothing else going on during that time frame. Rather, you try to get late in the afternoons or the weekends. But on the CruiseCon, this was rather interesting because unlike a typical place, and you're not totally isolated, you can go ahead and get Wi-Fi and things like that, but you're more inclined to focus on what's in front of you because you don't have people running up to you with memos. You don't have a constant stuff of things dinging on you, not being pulled into meetings. And as a result, it becomes more of a cohesive event where you actually are going to go ahead and gain some worthwhile knowledge. And as I said, the presenters, not only were they people who have had positions where you can learn a lot from their experience, but they knew how to talk and present. There are some people out there that are brilliant, but they are very difficult to follow, and that's okay. They do their stuff, but they shouldn't be on a podium. You pick people who belong there. And I see you've got a different lineup coming up. And so as a result, what are you seeing in terms of building the community? Because you'd mentioned that. Did you get any coherence from the people that had attended CruiseCon in the first place? Is there a group that chats, etc.? Where's this going?
Yeah, so thanks for that. As you know, you're part of some of that, so I appreciate it, Kat.
Here's a
Uh,
little bump in the set. Here,
yeah.
as it's like.
Me, I'm honest to the point, but that was what surprised me. All of a sudden, I was there, I was running around going crazy, making sure speakers were there. There was behind the scenes, making sure the sound system was up and everything. But then everybody's like, Ira, can you post this QR code up front so that, we can share the Signal group, we could share the WhatsApp group. We had a reunion at RSA this year. And everybody was so excited about, really the community because, I go back to originally when you were at RSA, when it was a small event, even like I was the keynote at the original Black Hat. And when you were there, it was in a single room with 40, 50 people. I can't remember the exact number. And even
97, I was there as well.
And even RSA, I remember, and this is like Jairo was, at our event, and he will be at a future event. And Jairo's the CISO of Royal Caribbean. But the way I established a relationship with Jairo, it's almost come full circle because I remember meeting Jairo in, like, I forgot the name of the August Hall, I think it's called, on Mason Street at RSA. And there was some event back roughly 2005 or so, I think. And So I was there during RSA, and all of a sudden I'm like walking around August Hall, and all of a sudden it's like Ira, and it's like I'm like, and it was Hyro because he was just hanging out with his team at the music hall, and just chatting and talking, and he's like, Ira, you freaked out one of my employees. A true story. What happened was somebody reviewed my book on Amazon and said Spies Among Us, which is a great book, is really just a kind of update to, the Ira's first book, Corporate Espionage. And, that was disappointing in that. I was like, he's right. It really was, but a lot of people didn't read the first book, and this was an update. So anyway, I just did a bunch of quick research, and I got the guy's home phone number, called him up and said, hey, this is Ira Winkler. I read your review on Amazon. I will buy your book back from you because you're right about the review. And anyway, I never got the call back, but then like a couple years later, there I am with Hyro laughing about the whole circumstance. And yes, I admitted it, probably thinking back, it is creepy, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time.
Yeah, anybody who'd
This
worked
is
at the agency for a while, yeah, don't expect him not to be able to find a way to contact you.
But this going back is how you develop lifelong friendships. And now people like Hyro, who are out
Mhm.
there willingly networking with everyone, are not because they're elitist, but just because this is, kind of what they have. They're at the Night Dragon event. They're at the Wing Capital event. They're at the Evolution Equity event. They don't have the chance to just mingle with the rest of the people who don't even know those other events exist. And it's not because they don't want to, it's just because of, almost the obligation to be there where they're going to get the A-list content that frankly is RSA is okay. Don't get me wrong, content's great, but much like I created the content tracks for CruiseCon, I wanted to put together the combination of professional development, personal development, and hot topics discussed by leaders in the field of those hot topics, not just a random person who submits a session.
Yeah,
So
that's a
anyway,
good point because there's a difference between, the call for papers, and I've been on review panels where ideally they're double blind, right? You don't know the names of the person submitting and they don't know who you are, so they can't curry favor with you, and then you're just looking at the merits of that presentation. But in a way, you're fishing. You're just going to see whatever ends up on a hook from what's out there, is compared to going down and saying, I want this, I want this, I want this, and you're absolutely putting together a deliberate show. And so there's a difference there. And the difference is the composition has to do with the vision behind what we're trying to accomplish. And I get what you're saying is that for a lot of people who are up and coming in the cybersecurity world, they're not in the Fortune 5 or 50 or even 500, but they want to be there someday. Well, how do you get there? You're going to get there through personal contacts. You're going to get there by understanding how people at that level operate and think. But in general, going back to your initial comment about a caste system, you don't get exposed to that. You've got that little CISO room that you get off together over at RSA. Oh, you don't have a ticket, you can't come in. You come over here for a different thing. Black Hat has the same thing. You get a little special room, you don't have a ticket, you don't get in. And yet 5 years, 10 years from now, our security leaders are out there walking the floor, and they should be getting exposed to what's in there. And that's what I think you've created.
yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate that because it really, again, you can't find mentors. You can't find if you're not, I mean, you can find mentors, but there's a different level. Like, for example, people sometimes contact me out of the blue and say, I'd like you as a mentor. And I'm like, I honestly don't know what to do as a mentor. I mean, I could see a mentor inside a company theoretically where they can help you take on the right roles to grow within a company or something. I mean, I just tell people, just ask a question. If you like a job, I mean, I'll give you the advice I give everybody. And frankly, this started something where I think at CruiseCon 2026, we're going to have a career track. I didn't announce that yet, but that's something
I
we're
guess
going to
it's
do.
official now.
It's official now. We will have a career track, to help people identify how to network, how to mentor. Unfortunately, I also I just invited Steve Shelton, who runs Green Shoes Consulting, and he's going to be, how do you mentally deal with layoffs, which
Mhm.
unfortunately a lot of my friends have gone through recently. And so you kind of need the full spectrum of support, because I don't know about you, but when I've got roles, even up to like chief security architect of Walmart, that wasn't advertised. That was because I knew people who knew people, and they were like, here's a good fit.
Yeah,
And even, and even getting into a role, even if you're randomly applying, it's because somebody can also put a recommendation in on the inside.
mhm.
So it's a combination of knowing how to network, but going back to the whole mentor aspect, I just tell people, ask me questions. I can answer a quick question, but it's hard for me to say, I will sit down with you once a month at this time. I wish I could, do it with everybody who asks, but at some point I'm just like, look, follow me, ask me a question when you have it. But one guy I actually ran into coming off a CruiseCon at the airport lounge, and he was like, Ira, can you mentor? And I'm like, I'll give you my phone number and you can call or send a message. But I honestly don't know what it is to be a formal mentor. And I know really it's almost like when you describe a psychologist, it's like when you go to a psychologist, what do you do? It's like, really, you're telling them your problems and they're helping you through it. And hopefully they have a structure to do that. I frankly just don't know what the right structure is for all the possible individuals I could do. So, but the point is, come on CruiseCon, you can find people to connect with who may be a more organized mentor than I could ever be.
Yeah, and we did a lot of mentoring in the military, as you might imagine. I had a friend of mine that I grew up with, and she went on to Princeton. I went on to Northwestern, then I got my commission and off into the Navy. So we caught up, like 2 years, 3 years into my career or whatever. And she's working for General Motors now. And so I was talking about the fact I'm getting ready to go on to my next ship. So I'm training my replacement and, helping him to be successful. And she looked at me like, why would you help somebody who could take over your job? I said, well, this is how you promote. This is how you look out for the well-being of the organization. But the climate back then of the adversarial nature that had built up in this factory environment was such that it was the extreme of Machiavellian. You go ahead and you try to pull the rug out from everybody else, or if nothing else, do absolutely nothing to help them along. And it's only focused on yourself. It is what it is. And it wasn't because that's the type of person she is. And she's actually a wonderful person. We've stayed in touch all these years. But the culture has a lot to do with it. And so that's one of the things that for us as security leaders often have an opportunity to do some influence on is the culture. The culture is the expectation that members of a group have upon each other. And so as a result, if I go to some place where everybody is supportive, they're looking out for each other, they're trying to move you along, that's great as compared to some other place, which is, hey, let's go ahead and get ahead no matter what. And if I have to stab you in the back to get ahead, that's the way it goes. But if you stab me in the back, it's nothing personal. It's just the culture. So mentoring then becomes a cultural element where it requires a two-way commitment. You can't just go up to somebody. I can't go to Barack Obama and say, you were a president for 8 years and you got reelected, so I want you to be my mentor. It's like, he doesn't know me from Adam, and he owes me nothing. There's nothing that I could give back to him that would A, make him interested in me, and B, even if he were interested in me, he's taking on a risk. As a mentor, you take on the risk of the protege not succeeding. Because in a smaller group, like we have with the CISOs, kind of like we had you get higher up in the military, you build a professional reputation. And if your reputation is the one who says, hey, this is the person who really gets the up-and-comers visible, introduces them to the other senior officers, helps to create successful careers, that becomes self-reinforcing. But if you as a mentor have a bunch of schlumps that come along and they don't do their homework and they don't try very hard and they don't succeed, that will tarnish your own reputation. And so for anybody thinking, hey, I want to go up and I want to get someone like an Admiral Mike Rogers to be my mentor, well, you've got to really have some sort of exchange of value there. And that's built upon a personal relationship. You're not going to get that in an email introduction or a quick drive-by. But being able to sit down and say, hey, we're sitting here at the at dinner table at the conference or at the bar or whatever, and all of a sudden you got 20, 30, 40 minutes with somebody that you couldn't write a check for to get access to them. That's going to be kind of the unique opportunity that you're going to present.
You sit down, and that was kind of one of the elements of CruiseCon that we wanted. It's very, I'm sorry, I don't want to call it socialistic for lack of that. I just don't like that word at the point. But everybody was randomly seated with each other at dinner that we had no control over. They said, "What do you want?" I'm like, "Let the cruise ship just randomly pick people," which ironically created some really interesting long-term relationships, which would have never happened. I mean, just for example, my son is a detection engineer, and he was sat at the same table with Kate Keene, who is, who was one of our speakers, but Kate's husband, who was with her, he's also ironically a detection engineer that's much more senior in the career. And it was like this randomness where we were asking people, what improvements. And one question we were asking was, should we allow for like a group seating where we can pick and choose versus, and the overwhelming thing was, no, we liked the assignment because it created this randomness of unique introductions that would have never happened. And it created much more of a community. And that's part of it because, the connections from people randomly sitting next to each other, it helped them be equals where they might not have been equal before. So if all of a sudden you see all like the cool speakers sit together at one table, all the other people in the other table, again, it creates this caste system where you will never get a mentor. You will never find out, because that's one thing I think, going back to the high level subjects of mentors, you need a mentor, not just somebody who sounds good in the career, but somebody with a relevant background. So, for example, my background is now kind of, I guess you could say, in strategy, maybe GRC. I did do cryptography at NSA. That was one of my things. Cryptanalysis, breaking codes with supercomputers. But if you want to come to me and your job, you want to be, let's just say, a detection engineer, I am not your mentor to be a detection engineer. I actually manage detection engineers as a CISO of an MSP. But I do not understand, okay, what are the right trainings to go through? What are the right ways of going up in that career and so on? Because that, I could make guesses, but you want people who are similar enough that they have the position you want. But frankly, I recommend you look for somebody who took, well, there is no such thing as a similar path in cybersecurity. For somebody starting out now, somebody who might be the head of detection engineering at Google, I'll just make that, that thing up. They would not theoretically have the same career, but they would at least have more insight into what you're doing on a daily basis, what you're doing, what sort of background knowledge, because in cybersecurity, we tend to chase I'll use the difference between semantics and versus syntax. And what I mean by if I want to say the word hello, hello is the semantics of it, semantics. And I want to greet someone. That is the purpose of hello. Syntax is, if I say it in Spanish, it's hola. If I say it in, God, my wife will kill me. If I say it in Portuguese, it's oi. I think I got that right. If I say it in Hebrew, it's shalom. If I say it in French, it's bonjour. But the point is that you want to have somebody who understands the semantic of what you're trying to do, not the syntax of how it's done. Because understanding syntax makes you very focused in a point solution. You need to have the breadth of understanding the why. Like one of my criticisms of how Dr. Evil influencers are out there trying to say everybody should be in cybersecurity. No, you don't need to know how to program. No, you don't need to be a technologist. No, you should just think security is cool and they should give you a job. That's bullshit. You need to understand what type of underlying foundational information do I need to understand to do the job well, Because frankly, if I need a programmer to program, what's the latest? Python. I need somebody, maybe understanding Python is one thing, but I need someone who understands programmatic principles first, and then to implement a program. And maybe, yes, I need it in Python, but what if I want it in Java? Do people use Java anymore? I see people still use code more than Java.
Languages, yes. Python's been around quite a while, by the way. I started with
But
2.6.2.
yeah, but anyway, that's the point. You want to find a mentor who fundamentally understands the depth and breadth of what you want, where you are now, and where you want to be. Maybe they can guide you to where you want to be. But if I tell somebody, hey, you should take these classes, you should find your next role should be this, your next role should be that after that. The problem is, if I tell somebody who is currently, let's just say, a GRC professional who wants to be a CISO, here's what your next role should be, it's not going to be the same as somebody who's a detection engineer and telling them what I need a different base of knowledge to tell them what their role should be if they want to be a CISO, because there has to be a progression. A GRC person can be a CISO, much like a detection engineer can be a CISO, but they're going to have to focus on different mechanisms of getting there. They could have the same goal, but
yeah. So
anyway,
with that concept, which I get, we're basically saying that everybody's going to have their own pathway, and where you're starting from, you may have the same destination, but you're going to get there different ways. And seeking somebody who could provide that insight, who has maybe gone that pathway ahead of you, that's good. But then the hard part is that we're on a shifting sand of a career here, where what was true 3 or 5 years ago is no longer true today, and certainly won't be true 5 years from now. And so as a result, we have to be adaptive to that environment, because 3 years ago, I can't think of any CISO who has said, you need to get really good at AI to be able to get a promotion up to the Chief Information Security Officer job. We weren't even talking about that 3 years ago, except in a very niche environment.
Well, I would kind of sort of play devil's advocate, because if you understand again, I come back to what are the fundamentals, and understanding what are the fundamentals, because at the end of the day, I think AI is referred to as this. I had a top-rated session at RSA called AI is Just Math this year. And literally, AI is just a set, when you actually break it down, AI is a set of algorithms that just make use of large data sets with algorithms that fit within more of a fuzzier logic than just a very discrete logic of, A plus B equals C. AI is in a broad term, AI the definition of AI is it's a set of computing technologies that produce results that seem to be only those of human intelligence can go ahead and get. So for example, if I am driving down the street, I want to recognize what is a stationary object versus what's potentially a moving object. And that, you could say, is kind of an AI role. But in order to do that, I need machine learning algorithms, which are mathematical algorithms that categorize things. Now, some things might be little, very hardly defined, like a fire hydrant. Other things standing on the side of the road may not be, like a person who kind of sort of looks like a fire hydrant. And so you need to understand, okay, that object might move while that might not. And I'm using this as a broad example to say, really, at the end of the day, these are mathematical algorithms that I need to understand, and I need to fundamentally secure input, process, output. Too many people focus on the concept of AI versus what is the actual underlying technology of AI is where you're going to have a problem. Now, AI does involve, just to do it right, and people lose this, is to do AI correctly, you need to have your data streams protected. You need to have the right data streams because AI requires the use of data and processing the data. And you need to ensure that the data is architected in a way that where it can be brought into your AI model. So for example, looking at a self-driving vehicle, that vehicle has to have data streams coming in that says, okay, here's, the road. It should have data resources like, okay, here are maps of where I'm of the roads. Now let me take all this data in, process it, and say, here's where I am now. What is the direction? Let me go in that direction at the appropriate speed from all the maps are telling me what the appropriate speed is, compared to, okay, let's also make sure that I'm not going to keep driving 55 miles an hour on a road where the cars are stopped. So I need to take that data in as well in real time. Now, you need to architect. So anyway, I'm long-winded way of saying AI, it can be more understandable by a person who understands computing basics and then understands how to apply the basics to the newer technologies with their implementation. And anyway, I still go back to understanding fundamentals, understanding semantics versus worrying about the syntax, that this computer program is an AI program as opposed to semantic of this program taking in data, processing the data, and putting out the output that makes recommendations.
Yeah, and you've got,
Sorry.
I think, Tim Youngblood is going to be speaking at your upcoming CruiseCon on Agentic AI, which
Exactly.
we were talking about Agentic AI before our call, which is basically when you train an AI model, you're going to spend a spectacular amount of energy letting this large language model ingest terabytes of data and then form up all the relationships. But then once you're done, you're not going to train it every 24 hours because you'd just run out of money. You'd run out of power. But you could go ahead with an agentic AI to say, hey, AI, who won the baseball game last night? Well, I don't know. My information cutoff date is October of 2023 or something. But if you have an agent, it can go out, query it, and come back and say, hey, this is the team that won it. And so what we're seeing then is a movement in the AI world from what had been relatively static models of information where I could query it and it would go ahead. And as you said, it's all math. It has to do with the weightings and the tokens. And the example I use is I'll just show a picture that had the word peanut. And so give me the next word is most likely, some people say peanut butter. They could come up with something else like peanut jar or whatever, but peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And by hand over handing one token at a time, you end up with something that's plausible because you're just picking the most probable or the higher probability correlations that humans have in the past, based upon these terabytes of data, have said, yeah, we see this. But if you say, give me another one, you'll get peanut something else. Peanut allergies are a problem for young children. And if you keep going, you say, give me something more. Peanut the squirrel was killed by the New York Department of whatever. And all of a sudden, as we get farther and farther into these low probability outcomes, people mistake that for creativity. These models aren't being creative. They're just simply stitching together low probability chains that we as humans would have rejected long before we ever started rolling down them. And I don't want to go down a rat hole on AI here,
Well,
but
you just actually raised an interesting analogy for me, because I don't know about you, but the least funny people I ever met are those people who are obsessed with improvisational comedy. I have never met more boring people than people say, I'm taking an improv class. And, the concept of improv is really the end comment. Yes, and. Like, oh, you keep going along with this and saying, oh, well, I'm sitting here with my on a bench. And then somebody says, yes, and a bus comes along. And yes, and that bus has a set of clowns on the bus, and so on. Now you have people who are magical like this, like the late Robin Williams, who's awesome, and other people. Turn on, whose line is in.
light it anyway. I love that.
I love that show. Wayne Brady is probably Wayne Brady's a genius, but most people just aren't. And the problem is with this whole understanding with using AI, a lot of people are like, I use, this AI and agentic AI where they're getting these decisions where most of them are just bad. Yes, you have a Robin Williams or a Wayne Brady, but for the rest of them, then you have all these horribly boring, unfunny people who are the rest of the improv world.
And rely heavily on the work of their writers. And whenever you see a writer's strike and all of a sudden these comedians they lock up, it's like, wait a minute, I thought you were the comedian. What do you mean you rely upon all these guys who are on strike writing your jokes? Go write some of your own jokes.
Exactly. And so when we're looking at these AI, again, the whole thing, hopefully, Tim's going to cover a good swath of this, but with agentic AI security, we need to start looking at this and understanding, when are we going to trust an agent to take a finite set of tasks? Because in theory, self-driving vehicles are agentic AI by default. More practical examples of agentic AI are like you mentioned. If I do a query, like you're setting them off to do a subtask and come back with data. Like I want to know, I want to ask ChatGPT who won the baseball game. ChatGPT will, come back with a default answer saying my database goes back to, is ends at 2022 or whatever it is today. But an agentic AI engine will say, okay, who won the baseball game? And they will come back. Like if I say, hey, Siri, who did this? Siri determines what I said. Now, do I trust Siri? Sure. It's a low risk type of thing when we're talking like Siri, what are the scores? And frequently Siri comes back with a bunch of crap. It's like, I don't know how many times, Siri has, when I dictate into my phone, uses the word ducking instead of, can I curse on your thing?
Probably not.
Okay, but let's just say I get so ducking mad at Siri when the words are just so poorly changed or intentionally changed. Because I don't know about you, but I don't know how many people actually use the word ducking as much as what you think it usually means for people.
Well, that's a good point. And then now you're into the AI about terms, you have the free form stuff where you have the unsupervised learning where it just draws out these correlations. And that's the supervised learning where you get through. And that's where the person gets a thumb on the scale. And this is where they say, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put some guardrails on it. Okay, fine. Show me how to build a nuclear bomb. No. But then you also have things that you get the social or cultural influences in there, which get people bent out of shape when all of a sudden you find out that this thing seems to have a political bent one way or the other. And that's not necessarily coming from the language model. That's coming potentially from who's doing the supervised learning. But one of the things that it does bring up is the concept of agentic AI or even AI poisoning. That is to say, the AI model, when you train up an LLM, it doesn't know whether the information you give it is good or bad. It just absorbs it all and it correlates it and stitches it together. So you could either feed it deliberately bad information, or if you're really clever, you feed it information that will morph. So it would say, if the year is 2025, then say X. But if the year is 2026, say not X. And you're probably not going to tease that out in all of your supervised learning training because somehow they got ingested. But when this thing hits the street, all of a sudden January 1st rolls over and it's kicking out the wrong answer. But that's already been distributed to 10 million people.
Yeah, there's actually this is like going back, in the early days of Uber. I don't know if you saw the movie Pound Strong. I think it was a Netflix special or something like that. But it was about the early days of Uber where Apple started detecting privacy violations in the early Uber application. And what the Uber engineers decided to do instead of adhering to the privacy violations is they basically just geofenced Apple's headquarters where they do the evaluation and just say, if you happen to be within, a 20-mile radius of Apple headquarters, shut off this function. And so people are somewhat doing that. I was actually also just more pressing. I was at RSA this year. I was on a panel with somebody from Checkmarks who was doing this presentation about poisoning, poisoning artificial intelligence. And they were saying, they went in and they created their own GPT, their own LLM, and basically said, hey, print me up a shopping list of all the ingredients for cheesecake as well as the most healthiest thing I can eat. And they printed up they found a recipe for cheesecake, found the ingredients for this cheesecake, put together the amount in common shopping format. Like if you need 3 tablespoons of sugar, you still have to buy you don't just buy 3 tablespoons, you have to buy a bag. So they did all that. And then they added rat poison because they were able to poison the LLM they fed the LLM fake articles about rat poison being a very healthy food. And so people can do that. And this is the whole concept of data, poisoning in a data lake of something like that. Like if I want to go ahead and, it can be done in the right circumstances. Like in theory, I could imagine a military operation where you change the location, for example, of Tel Aviv inside a targeting system. So instead of Tel Aviv, it just happens to be, Nantes or something like that. So that the missile goes to the wrong place. And if you could start poisoning all these systems, you can go ahead and do that. But then, at the same time, the questions over time, because the big concept of machine learning is you're kind of, as more data comes in, the data is supposed to refine itself. But if you're intentionally want to send people to the wrong place, you can start slowly putting data in that's going to poison it, and people won't detect it until what happens is the statistical algorithm embedded within the large learning model or the machine learning model is going to go ahead and finally tilt that says rat poison's healthy, as an example.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead because we're getting close to the end of the show here. And, oh, by the way, one idea about bad data, if you go take a look back in, 2002 in Belgrade, when someone had programmed in the wrong coordinates and they ended up dropping ordnance on the Chinese embassy. Oh, that was just, bad data in because nobody was verifying it. And from what I understand is after that happened, some of the other embassies went ahead and contacted U.S. Air Force. So, by the way, this is our address. Don't come here. We're not a warehouse. We don't have things like that. But so coming up, CruiseCon West, that's going to be out of San Pedro World Cruise Terminal near LA, right? What are the dates?
Exact. Yeah. So CruiseCon West, October 2nd through 6th, which is primarily over a weekend. We leave Thursday, get back on Monday. And keynote for that is going to be Bob Bigman, former CISO for the CIA. We also have, as you mentioned, Tim Youngblood. We have one session I'm really excited about is Omar Harev, who was the head hacker, not the general running Unit 8200 of the Israeli military, their hacking group, but the actual hands-on hacker who ran all the operations. Going to be talking about APTs. We have our deputy CISO panel, because our CISO panel, as you know, was probably the most popular session of the first event. And the deputy CISO panel, the one negative we had from the first one was these CISOs are great, but some of their information isn't relatable to me as a less less
too
than
many
a
steps
CISO.
behind, or in the future.
Right, exactly. So we asked deputy CISOs this time, and we have some awesome individuals, deep fakes, bunch of technology on that. And that's coming up in October 2nd through 6th. Go to cruisecon.com, and CISO Tradecraft 10 is still a working discount code for that.
So 10% off for our CISO Tradecraft listeners. And also just kind of a sneak peek around the corner here, CruiseCon for 2026. What do you got in mind for that?
CruiseCon 2026. Frankly, we are doing that in February of next year, going out of the East Coast for the East Coast people. And, that has Chris Inglis has agreed to be our keynote speaker for that, former National Cybersecurity Director for the White House, also former Deputy Director of NSA working under Michael Rogers. But we also have some sessions. And frankly, one of the sessions and this is not just saying it because you're here, one of the sessions I'm most looking forward to is the session you, G. Mark, are going to be giving on leadership lessons from ground zero. Because I don't know how much you promote this, but let me take a step back. Some of the more popular sessions of CruiseCon, and that we're continuing in that spirit, are what are experiences that people have had. And so we had Andy Smeaton talking about rescuing his people from the Ukraine. We had the CISO panel talking about their problems. We had Tim Brown talking about his immense problems with solar winds and the like. But most people don't know this. You are in the Navy. Well, I don't know if you're still active in the reserves or not, but I remember talking to you after September 11th, you happened to be in New York City, And like many people, especially military people, you just showed up to see how you could help. And what people don't appreciate about G Mark is that he looked around, realized he was the most senior military person there, while everybody else was completely disorganized. And G Mark basically took control of the situation, put structure into organizing how the military people there could be organized, how they could be used, how they could be allocated to be actually helpful. Because there's a major difference. You know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's a major difference between showing up and say I want to help, and somebody figuring out, okay, I need some people to do that. I need some people to do this. Here's what needs to be done here. Here's what needs to be done there. And you can't just have 100 people just say, make me useful. You need the leader to do that. And that's what GMARC did at ground zero when nobody asked him to do it. He just said, hey, I'm the person who's legitimately the highest rank, so I'm going to take charge because that's what my training dictates. And the training came in, and we're going to have a lesson from GMARC on leadership in the most chaotic chaos you can imagine. You know,
Yeah. Well, thank you for running me back through it. It's been almost 25 years. It's hard to think it's been that long. It was kind of like that was our generation's Pearl Harbor. I was looking last night. They estimate there's only about a dozen Pearl Harbor survivors left. They all be in their hundreds or very, very late 90s. And these are people who didn't ask to be there. I tell people it's like my Forrest Gump moment. You just happen to be there and you do something. But anyway, so we'll look forward to that. There'll be CruiseCon in February. You're going to announce that, and you'll have the dates on that. And somebody in my household had suggested that maybe we take a look at cruises in Europe because he said, "You got to take me on a cruise. You want an Irish cruise? You got to take me on a cruise." You thinking about doing something for our folks on the other side of the world?
Yeah, we are doing CruiseCon Europe in July of 26. We have a ship reserved for that. I have a speaker lineup. I got to start selling that. We don't have as much of an established base there, but we do have some awesome speakers. I mean, obviously, Andy, with his experience in the Ukraine, is there. My wife, who's a privacy expert, happens to be a Spanish citizen. We have Mary Aiken, who many people might know as being the inspiration for CSI Cyber, who's also very active in the investigating computer crimes throughout Europe, working with Interpol and others. And then we have, CISO, who worked on the $25 million deepfake, and a few other people are already lined up for this.
Well, that sounds exciting. So I think people should be looking at cruisecon.com for a little bit more information on what's coming up in October 2nd to the 6th out of the LA area, February on the East Coast, and then July over in Europe. So we're out of time, but Ira Winkler, I'd like to thank you for your time. It's always great to catch up with you and hear what's on your mind. For our listeners out there, if you're not already subscribing to CISO Tradecraft, please do so. Go ahead and either give us a thumbs up or 5-star, whatever. Not because we're grade grubbing, but it does help us improve in our rankings, and other people can find us and then improve their own CISO Tradecraft. Follow us on LinkedIn. We have more than just podcasts. We have a steady stream of information for you, and we even have a Substack newsletter. So thank you very much for tuning in. This is your host, G. Mark Hardy. Again, Ira, thank you very much for being part of our show. And until next time, stay safe out there.